Hi, everyone, and welcome to No Kill in Motion. I'm David Smith from No Kill, Colorado, and we're here today with Shirley Marsh from Yes Biscuit. Shirley has just come out with a book, The Columbus Dog Show Fire. And well, I think you have a clue of what this is going to be about. But let's talk to Shirley about it first. So, Shirley, there was a dog show. This took place late 1800s.
Yes, it was in January of 1888, specifically January 10th, 11th, and 12th were the scheduled dates for the show. That was a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at that time. And it was in Columbus.
Right. Okay. And there were 300 dogs entered, but there were quite a few more dogs and other animals at this show, correct?
Yeah, many of the newspapers reported the 300 dogs entered in the show figure. Um, I was only ever able to find about 150 dogs. So there could be a few uh, reasons for the discrepancies. That the clubs often overinflated the numbers of dogs entered just to make it sound more appealing for other people to, enter their dogs. Um, and it could be some of those dogs were entered in multiple classes, which was allowed at the time. You could put a puppy in the puppy class, and you could put them in the open class, and those kind of things. So there were 150 or possibly more dogs, up to 300, and there were a lot of birds. Again, varying figures. I settled on an estimate of roughly 2,500, but there could have been more or less.
Wow. So birds were a big thing for shows back then, huh? I didn't realize
Yes.
that. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. Um, so how'd you come across this story and what inspired you to write about it?
I came across it because I read a lot of articles and books from that era, specifically about dogs. And when I first came across it, I uh, was reading the story, and I said, "How can this have happened?" And I never heard of it. I couldn't quite believe that this was not right. This was not part of our legacy that we all know about today. It just didn't seem right to me. So I was actually working on a different book at the time, and I was going to include a mention of the fire in the book, and that story, it just stayed in my mind month after month. I just could not get it out of my mind. Both the aspect of how horrifying it was, and devastating, and also the fact that there were no memorials for these dogs. And so eventually I just said, I'm just going to start looking and see if I can find something else, anything about these dogs. I don't
Well,
know what I might be able to find, but I'm going to look.
apparently
And
you
so,
were able to find a lot because
yeah.
I have gone through and it's great. And it's so that brings me to tell our readers, is this book about the fire? What is this book about?
It is not. And I am so thankful to have the opportunity to address that, because um, I know from the title, obviously, some people could think I cannot read, snuff porn. It's not, it's not about the fire entirely. It's over 300 pages long. 10 of those pages are devoted to the fire, but it is about the dog's lives, and to a lesser extent, the people who owned them. And that was the point of writing the book, is to celebrate the fact that those dogs were alive.
So the book has, it has a lot of other writing from historical for newspapers and you're writing about, the historical family experiences of some of the dogs or, the owners and such. And what you were saying about that the book is about the dog. The one sentence from you that just stuck out to me immediately when I read it was, they deserve to be remembered even if it is painful. Because you literally go through every dog you found. As you said, you only found about 150, right? Um, but we really get to know them if we want to, or we could get to know one of them if we want to, right? You know that I am a big dog fan. I love my big dogs. I have a little dog too. I love her. But I love big dogs. And so, I was drawn to the large dogs there, and knowing more about them, and really following some of that story. Um, there were a couple of things that stood out to me. And the one was the way that these dogs moved across the country to the shows. Let's talk about that for a little while. I mean, you explained it pretty well in the book.
Yeah, at the time, people were not loading up their minivans and getting on the freeway to go to a dog show with their dogs. Okay, we didn't have motor vehicles for the most part, and we didn't have roads for the most part. So, train was really the primary means of transportation. Um, so, dogs were sent to the shows on the trains, either with the owner traveling in the passenger car, and the dogs are put in the shipping cars, or believe it or not, they were often sent by themselves. The owners would send somebody from the kennel to bring them to the station and send them to the dog show. Someone from the dog show would go to the station to pick up the dogs and bring them to the show site. And when they were done, they would bring them back to the rail station and send them either home or onto the next show, wherever they were going. Um, and it is hard to think of doing that now, but that was the custom at the time.
Yeah, what I really thought about there is, I mean, people transport animals now, and there's problems there. But I think generally, we have like standard cages for, protection and that kind of thing. And quite often you can have food and or water, depending on the type of transport. But one of the things that struck me on that is sometimes there was no standard for that. So these animals could travel with no food or water until they got to their destination.
Right. There weren't any standard shipping crates. They did have some, but they were rather constricting. Uh, Unfortunately, many dogs suffocated while in the rail cars.
Yeah.
They got stuff packed all on top of them, other things that people needed to ship, whether it was other dogs or other, items. And some dogs, the owners didn't send a box with them, and they just got chained inside the car, and mistakes happened sometimes. Dogs were sent to the wrong destination. And of course, then they're just, the club is left to try to track them down. We were expecting this dog. Where did he go? We have to contact the rail, find out from the company where this dog might be, and can we get him back here. But tragically, dogs did die somewhat regularly.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the lighter note on that, because there was a passage in there by someone named John M. Tracy. He was a reporter, I think he was a judge, and he wrote in the paper, and it was nice to see this side of it. He said, "I've never looked in one of the great kennels where a swarm of dogs were kept without thinking of children in some great asylum where they might indeed be every comfort and luxury, but after all, no home." And he goes on to say, Still man or dog will thrive best where there's a close personal sympathy and companionship." So there were people there that had the same connection that we have to dogs today. I wanted to point that out, because when I read that, I was like, thank you, John, whoever you were, for being, one of the people that actually saw that. And we also see it in the loss of a dog. I believe his name is St. Charles.
Sir Charles.
Sir Charles, and I don't remember the owner's name, but the owner was truly stricken. They had to take him away, I think, with a doctor because they were afraid he was going to he literally go insane because of his attachment to one of the dogs. I think it wasn't even his dog, was it? It was his
Right.
friend's.
It wasn't his dog. He was the handler for the dog, and the dog lived with him. And his whole family, he had children, and a wife. His whole family was very attached to the dog. So he lost several dogs in the fire. That we're talking about a gentleman named Harry Goodman, that were his own. And but his attachment to this Saint Bernard, Sir Charles, was just so strong that he was so devastated and absolutely focused. He just couldn't get over this loss. The idea of the loss of the dog, when he showed up to the show site that morning, expecting it was going to be the last day of the show, and to find out that his dogs had died, in the fire.
Yeah, and uh, and it really connected me when I saw. I believe it was the grandson of Sir Charles. You have a photo of a drawing of him, I think, in there. Not Sir Charles himself. I don't think there was one of him. And it made a real connection to that dog and that story. It was really visceral for me. But hearing those attachments. I really liked hearing that because we think of 100 years ago, 150 years ago, the relationship we have with animals today is quite different. But at the same time, there were plenty of people that had the same attachment that we have to them, even though we may not have had the same approaches to the way that we work with them. One of the other interesting things was like mistakes with the dogs in the shows in general, just historically. There was one scenario is that a big dachshund probably didn't look different enough from a small basset hound in 1887 to make anyone realize that the dog won in the wrong class. And one of the things that I noticed as I was looking at these images is I didn't recognize a lot of breeds. I did recognize some. Saint Bernard looks very different, but I recognized it. I think the English setter was the only dog that I'm like, oh yeah, that's an English setter. There was almost no other dog that I'm like, oh, that's a mixed breed, and I probably might have guessed the mixed breed, right? But the pug, some of the others, it was only the setters in general that kind of looked the same to me, and some of the terriers. Everything else, I'm like, I'm not sure if I would recognize that dog today, which I think is there is some problems with breeding that you and I have spoken about before. But it is really interesting the changes in 150 years of these breeds, and that's a fascinating part of the book for me, is to look at those photos and look at what many of these dogs looked like back then as compared to now, and the changes that have actually happened through that industry. The other thing that stuck out to me is there's it wasn't explicit, but this was a very privileged hobby, right? Talk about that a little bit of who was actually showing up there, because today lots of people show dogs, right?
Right.
But not then.
Yeah. No, not then. It was basically a white, wealthy man's hobby. Um, they were primarily the owners. There were some white women who did show their dogs. However, they were referred to as, lady fanciers or such things. They were sort of singled out. And they were basically, the clubs were basically made up of white wealthy men. They were putting on shows for other white wealthy men to enter their dogs. The judges were white wealthy men. It was very much a patriarchal setting, and there certainly were um, uh, problems that arose from time to time with having the unwashed public, allowed to attend the shows, which the clubs wanted people to attend because they paid an admission fee, and that's how clubs made their money. However, they didn't like the riffraff coming in and
Right.
looking at the dogs, So it was definitely a much narrower um, spectrum of people that were involved at the time.
It's also how breeding started to some degree, right? Because it was about good breeding, right? And people, the unwashed masses had curs. They had street curs, right?
Yeah.
There's a little of that still left today. But we're running out of time, Shirley. I want everybody to look at this: the Columbus Dog Show Fire by Shirley Marsh. It's not just about the fire. There's a lot in there that we really like, but it is about the fire, and it's about remembering each one of these dogs as I quoted in the beginning, as Shirley said, they deserve to be remembered, even if it's painful. It's a wonderful book. Where can they get it, Shirley?
It's on Amazon, both the paperback, and there is a Kindle version if you prefer to read online.
Okay, great. The Columbus Fire. I'm sorry because of the way my camera works. I'm afraid the book's not going to come. The Columbus Fire, Dog Show Fire by Shirley Marsh. Go out, check that out. I think it's a wonderful book. Shirley, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.